The W Series was a relatively short-lived single-seater competition that put women in motorsport in the spotlight like never before. But, despite the leaps and bounds it made, in 2022 the series came to an end. Today, I want to look at why this happened and why I think the F1 Academy, launched in 2023, will not suffer the same fate. Hello and welcome to Shh, the Girls Are Racing. My name is Miranda, and I truly believe that F1 Academy, in learning from the failures of the W Series, has the ability to achieve long-term success. The W Series gave some amazing opportunities to female racers that had never been seen before on that scale. However, it was rife with fundamental strategy and structural issues which ultimately caused its demise. I want to examine these issues and demonstrate how F1 Academy has learnt from the W Series failures to refine its product and ensure its long-term viability as a single-seater competition. Before I start, I must put a disclaimer. I was finishing up high school during the height of the W Series and hadn't really ever heard of motorsports before. So this is everything I've learnt from researching the W Series and F1 Academy, and I've tried to synthesize it as best as possible. Also, hindsight is such a valuable thing when assessing the failure of a sporting series, because it can be really difficult to see these problems in the moment. In my opinion, the W Series ended for three key reasons: funding, structure and management, and timing. Number 1, funding. I think that from the outset, the funding of the W Series seemed dubious at best. Of course it had sponsors, but it was mainly backed by only a few wealthy individuals, and this funding model was highly disproportionate to the significant expenditures of the W Series. Competitors' costs were fully paid for by the series, and this was between 18 and 20 drivers for each season. So, their entry was fully free and they didn't need to bring sponsors either. This was fantastic for the competitors, including those that had stopped competing due to financial reasons, but it wasn't so good for a series just starting out. Whilst this is a noble idea aiming to break the notion of motorsports as a rich boys club, which it sort of still is, it just isn't sustainable when considering the costs of running a car in a single-seater competition in its first, second, or third season. For the likes of F1, this is achievable due to its massive global reach and financial backing, but a series in its infancy could not feasibly support such costs. Putting this aside though, the real exceptional cost was the $1.5 million prize fund for each year of the championship. Now this is obviously very little money compared to something like F1, but when you think about the fact that F1 was in its 70th or so year when the W Series launched, having these kind of costs when only starting out places a massive financial burden on the business, requiring significantly more revenue to try and recoup this expenditure. It would also be naive to ignore the important fact that the series was meant to be going into its second year when COVID hit, which caused its cancellation. All of the possibility of building on the momentum established in 2019 evaporated, and potential sponsors and collaborators vanished in the economic uncertainty of the post-lockdown world. Any financial gains that could be made off of the back of the W Series inaugural season could no longer be counted on, and this left the competition having to radically rethink its financial model in order to remain viable. These factors left the W Series in a precarious position, and it would go on to have 2 more seasons before its financial issues would be its downfall, owing money to many of its investors and creditors even after the series had collapsed. F1 Academy, on the other hand, provides a fully funded GB3 seat to its champion each year, an expensive prize but not anywhere near that of the W Series. This is especially when competitors are required to contribute half of the cost of their seat in order to compete. In F1 Academy, this has been around €100,000 in recent years, and F1 covers the other half. All other travel and similar costs are to be paid by the drivers. This pretty significantly decreases the cost that F1 Academy must cover and decreases how much the series must earn in a year to break even or be profitable. Of course, this puts a financial barrier in place for competitors that did not exist in the W Series, but the significant subsidizing of each seat by F1 certainly assists in alleviating that monetary burden. Also, the fact that F1 Academy is under the F1 banner helps a lot too, as it has access to this stronger brand. The influence of the F1 brand is undeniable, and this assists the Academy's brand in having access to sponsors. This relationship is therefore very important to F1 Academy's ability to gain bigger and more sponsors, which gets the series more revenue and solidifies its financial viability year on year. Undeniably, the lack of funding is the ultimate reason that the W Series could not continue. In fact, after its demise, some competitors claimed they didn't receive prize money owed to them, but F1 and the Academy itself seems to have taken many lessons from this and structured the funding of the series in a way that ensures its ongoing and hopefully long-term financial success. so that more women and up-and-coming racers can compete, develop, and show their talent to the world. Structure and management. From the beginning, it was somewhat bizarre that such a groundbreaking competition like the W Series was ran by an individual outside of the motorsports industry. Catherine Bond Moyer is a successful lawyer and financier with significant experience in football and an interest in women in motorsports. Indeed, she initiated the W Series idea and went about garnering finance and interest in the competition, and she deserves all the credit for that. But as CEO of the W Series, I think someone with a bit more knowledge of how to run a successful single-seater competition was needed, especially in those crucial first years, to ensure the longevity of the program. This, in my opinion, led to some of the bizarre structural aspects of the W Series that decreased its opportunity for success. For example, one team ran the racing aspect of the competition, but drivers swapped cars and engineers each race. It had an aim of increasing fairness, but realistically, this was unlike regular single-seater competitions and would not have appropriately prepared the racers for stepping up into F3, F2, and eventually F1. Given the overarching aim of the W Series was to get a female racer into F1, the structure of the competition didn't really seem matched to achieving this goal. F1 Academy is run and overseen by Managing Director Susie Wolf, an incredible woman with substantial background and influence in F1. The significant business and motorsport-specific experience that she brings to this role means that financial, operative, and racing decisions made for the Academy are probably going to be highly effective in ensuring its long-term success and genuine driver development. The decision of the W Series to partially join F1 as a support series turned out to be a stumbling block. Of course, it is easy to know this in hindsight. I'm sure that at the time, this would have seemed like a positive step towards gaining a greater audience and more legitimacy. But it closed off the paddock compared to 2019, where fans, particularly younger girls aspiring to join motorsports, were able to meet the drivers and access more parts of the racing experience. It also reduced the W Series track time to only one practice, one qualifying, and one race. This left the competitors with very little development time in the car, and one of the lowest amounts of track time across all the different feeder series, like F3, F2, or Formula Regional. Additionally, whilst the W Series had great audience engagement in the UK, efforts to gain tangible global interest from fans were met with limited success. Particularly, the US audience, which had been targeted by the series as its largest potential growth area, struggled to get accessible TV coverage, which really hindered their introduction into this market. This, combined with their lack of broadcasting and expansion into other regions across the world, left the W Series with limited ability to gain new fans, sponsors, and ultimately, revenue. In the face of rising costs and the need to grow the series to ensure its longevity, this would be fatal. The ultimate truth is that without more fans, there won't be more money, so the lack of a proper media and TV strategy executed globally really hurt the series, once again, leading back to the big money question. The W Series also filmed and produced a TV show modelled after Drive to Survive, called Driven, about the 2019 season. It had limited release on Channel 4's on-demand service in the UK and was not widely known or seen. This therefore failed to give the series the necessary boost in audience and revenue that it desperately needed, particularly following the pandemic. Who knows where the W Series could be if its TV show had the same global impact as Drive to Survive? It is a question we'll never know the answer to. But this failure was another example of the difficult times the W Series existed in and its poorly implemented media engagement strategies. F1 Academy is different. Of course, it had a rocky first year whilst the global engagement and media broadcast strategy of the series was being cautiously rolled out. But from 2024, a strong plan was beginning to be executed, one that would continue into 2025. All races were broadcast on the usual F1 providers, such as Sky Sports, but there was a key difference. They would all be shown on YouTube for the whole world to access. On the other hand, the W Series had around 30 different broadcasting partners, with YouTube only available in countries where rights weren't secured. F1 Academy is much more broadly shared and available, and through strong YouTube viewership, people know where and how they can access races, which is so important for driving engagement. The key is that F1 Academy adapted its media strategy, refining it after its inaugural year to better suit its purpose and increase its audience, whereas the W Series continued looking for traditional media platforms through which its races could be shown. Additionally, in May 2025, F1 Academy launched its Netflix series called F1 The Academy, which focused on the storylines of the women competing in the 2024 season. Netflix, as a worldwide media distributor, has substantial reach, which has allowed people from all over the world to get to know F1 Academy and its drivers. It has been really well received so far, and judging from the audience growth from before and after the show was released, between the Miami and Montreal rounds, it seems that its impact is already beginning to be realised. At the Canadian Grand Prix, the stands were packed for the Academy feature race, and the signing session was more popular than ever. In terms of its broader structure also, F1 Academy has a race weekend format that is much more similar to other feeder series, particularly those that support F1 weekends. F1 Academy only acts as a support series for F1, racing at the same circuits on the same weekends, which has actually helped significantly grow its visibility, unlike what occurred with the W Series. Firstly, the F1 Academy has its own paddock that fans can engage with, and drivers are more readily accessible in specific signing sessions that occur over the weekend. Although it might change in the future, right now the F1 Academy paddock is free to enter in several locations, which helps strengthen fan connections to the drivers and their teams, as well as more broadly boosting the audience and engagement of the series. This is probably particularly effective when considering that paddock passes must still be bought for F2 and F3, which are pretty expensive, therefore meaning that F1 Academy is the most accessible feeder series on an F1 weekend. Having such an open paddock helps drive support of F1 Academy amongst race weekend attendees and motorsport fans. The W Series' inability to structure itself similarly became a key issue in driving its fan engagement, particularly outside of the UK where it was much less known. And this last bit is more of a minor point, but the W Series wasn't helped by having the same winner in all 3 seasons. Jamie Chadwick was obviously excellent, but it doesn't necessarily help a competition in its infancy when the same person wins every time. This is more acceptable in a well-established series like F1, but not a series just starting out. In my opinion, F1 Academy improved upon this format by first placing an age limit on participants and limiting their involvement to 2 seasons or winning the championship. This allows for more talented women to compete in the Academy, and also focuses more on the still developing younger drivers, who have a greater chance of climbing the single-seater ladder and possibly making it to F1. Timing. The last factor that I think worth mentioning is quite simply timing. It is something that was actually entirely out of the W Series control, but ultimately affected its operations and long-term viability. Timing, in my opinion, means 2 things. Firstly, the W Series' first season was in 2019, which was the first year of Drive to Survive. Therefore, it could be said that around the time it was operating, F1 was yet to reach a wider, more mainstream audience. It was harder to engage with motorsports and become a fan, but F1's Netflix show obliterated this exclusivity. F1 was suddenly much more accessible and gained many more fans. Whether the Netflix show had a positive or negative impact on the sport is another question. What we do know is that F1 gained thousands, if not millions, more fans and global reach. And through Drive to Survive, motorsports more broadly gained much more interest and popularity. But as it really exploded in 2020 and onwards, the W Series was not able to capitalise on this growth, which would have probably been fairly useful in its first season. The rise in F1 fans has indeed successfully filtered into other areas of motorsport, including F1 Academy, which has been able to gain support off of the back of F1's brand, which has always been influential, but in the 2020s is more powerful than ever. I think it is entirely possible that if the W Series had launched a couple years later, including its accompanying TV show, it could have utilised the rapidly growing interest in F1 to increase its own audience and engagement. This unfortunate mismatch in timing between the growth in F1 fans worldwide and the existence of the W Series meant that it could not capitalise on all the new motorsports fans becoming invested in single-seater competitions. And this leads me on to my second point about timing, which is about women's sports more generally. Now, this one is entirely my own opinion, backed up by some statistics. By timing, I mean that I don't think the world was ready. It is true that noise had been getting louder about better supporting female racers in motorsports and highlighting their abilities and athleticism. But I simply don't think that the world was ready to accept the, at the time, rather radical step of visibility of women's sports that the W Series represented. A women's only competition is not a unique invention, but it would be naive of me to ignore the fact that ideas like these, that go against the status quo, require public and social acceptance in order to succeed. It is fantastic that things have changed so much, but truthfully in 2019, I don't think that acceptance was there yet. In my opinion, women in sport and female-specific sports had been growing for quite some time in the 2010s, but specifically the 2023 Women's Football World Cup blew up female athletes like never before. It had ripple effects everywhere, including outside of football. People, not just women, became more invested than ever in women's sports, recognizing their abilities and the need to support and uphold the strong women working as athletes in these industries. In 2024, revenue in women's elite sports would surpass $1 billion, which was a forecast at least 300% higher than predicted in 2021. That World Cup is cited as a huge reason why women's sports were put in the spotlight and supported to a greater extent than ever seen before. The difference between 2023 and 2021 in predicting the growth and value of women's sports shows how things can change in such a short period of time. F1 Academy is in a prime position, timing-wise, to take advantage of this surging and ongoing interest in women in sports, including women in motorsports. The female proportion of the F1 fan base has been dramatically increasing, and many also want to support women who race as well, with a hope that we will see a full-time female F1 driver in this century. F1 Academy is perfectly placed to engage these fans, demonstrating that elite female athletes can do incredible things in motorsports as they make their way up the single-seater series ladder, with an eventual goal of reaching F1. When considering this, the W Series, in my opinion, was in the right place but at the completely wrong time. And I would be remiss in ignoring the rife sexism and misogyny that is occurring out loud and behind the scenes in motorsports, which was only so much more severe 6 years ago. Female fans are often still belittled, mocked, and vilified for their interest in F1. Launching some years later may have put them in position to take advantage of the recent success and growth of women in motorsport, garnering more audiences and engagement. But the truth is, we won't ever actually know. What we do know is that F1 Academy does seem to have been launched at the exact right time, and now in 2025, it is in the exact position it needs to be to take advantage of the growing interest in F1, motorsports, and women in sports more generally. Because of this, I think it will have a successful future ahead. It seems really unfair for the W Series to suffer this fate when these timing issues were completely out of their hands and control. But the competition nonetheless laid some fantastic groundwork for F1 Academy to continue spotlighting women in single-seaters, and carrying on both series' common goal of having the first full-time female F1 driver of this century. The W Series suffered issues of funding, structure, and possibly just being ahead of its time. It had several failures which resulted in its demise, but it wouldn't be a fair critique of the W Series if I didn't acknowledge the successes that the competition had. Whilst it may not have produced a female driver in F1, it did inspire thousands of young women to become passionate about and involved in motorsports, whether as drivers or in other roles. And the truth is, we might not know the true cultural impact and inspiring influence the series had for another 10 years or so, whilst those inspired young girls make their way through the motorsports youth ranks. But it gave for the first time so many young female motorsports fans role models they could look up to that actually looked like them and faced the same challenges as them. Suddenly, being a racing driver and a woman in motorsports seemed like something that could be actually tangibly achievable. I think F1 Academy is the best placed competition, culturally, structurally, and financially, to actually help develop and eventually bring a full-time female driver into F1. But it would not exist as successfully as it does without the W Series paving the way and sparking the conversation about women racing in motorsports. And truthfully, there was probably always going to have to be several stumbling blocks and false starts along the way before a successful women's single-seater series was launched and effectively ran, and the W Series was simply a victim of this evolution. So I think that despite the many issues it faced, the influence of the W Series cannot and should not be ignored. It can be deservedly criticised, but also recognised for the positives it generated for women in motorsports overall. This is a long one, but you finally made it to the end of the video. I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts about anything I discuss here today, so please comment down below and let's have a conversation. I did a lot of research for this video, but I've linked some key articles in the description if you're interested in reading more. These, in my opinion, reflect on the W Series and its legacy the best. Thanks for listening, and see you later.